please put your phones on silent and to write down the surveys in front of you to know your feedback for the coming events. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate, our esteemed guests, peace be upon you all. On behalf of His Excellency Dr. Al-Sayadi, the head of the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, I welcome you this evening with a lecture titled Iran's Threats to Close the Hormuz Strait in the Balance of International Law, presented by Mr. Abdul Latif Al-Sayadi, the research expert and lecturer in the National Archives of the Ministry of Presidential Affairs. Mr. Al-Sayadi holds a master's degree in international public law, a postgraduate diploma in public international law, and a bachelor's degree in Sharia and law. He is a member of the Union of UAE Writers, the Emirates Association for Lawyers and Legal Experts, and a research expert in the National Archives of the Ministry of Presidential Affairs. He has delivered lectures on the national level on the history, identity, and symbols of the UAE to tens of thousands of students and employees in hundreds of educational institutions, both on the federal and local government departments across the UAE. He also has authored several papers, including Legal Settlements of the UAE-Iran Dispute on the Three Islands, published by the National Archives of the Ministry of Presidential Affairs. Mr. Sayati has been, for his academic distinction, has been honored by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Crown Prince of the Abu Dhabi and the Deputy Supreme Commander of the UAE Armed Forces. May God protect him. And His Highness Sheikh Hamdan bin Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Crown Prince of Dubai, and His Highness Sheikh Saif bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Interior, and His Highness Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Presidential Affairs. He has also received the Exceptional Employee Award and the Outstanding Performance Award. He was also honored by hundreds of educational institutes as well as federal and local government departments, and was awarded more than 600 certificates and shields. And now it's my pleasure to welcome and invite Mr. Al-Sayadi to present his lecture. Please, the stage is all yours. Peace be upon you all. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate, and blessings on the Prophet Muhammad and his companions and followers and his family. Your Excellency Al-Sayadi, the director of the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, Your Excellencies, esteemed guests, it's my pleasure today to be part of this lecture with you. Abu Dhabi needed a cultural saloon or a meeting center, and the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research was the place to invite and for all of the intellectuals of the UAE to meet, or in Abu Dhabi to meet, who was under the wise direction of His Excellency, made this place a cultural hub that enriched the lecturer and not just received from it. When we are talking about the Iran's threats to close the Hormuz Strait, in which it's quite branching, since there's a geographic and historical and other branches in it. However, we're going to talk within our time frame and limit. You all know Iran continued threatening to close the strait for over 30 years after the revolution by Khomeini, and Iran has always been threatening and aggressively that they will close the strait in case they have any issues with us. The idea is, would Iran do that? We are today in a lecture that is especially about international law. I'm not going to talk about the geographical aspect, but about the legal aspect. And don't say that international law doesn't have any weight or power. Tonight, we're going to discuss this in an abstract way in the light of international law. Does Iran have the right to close the strait? This is the topic of the lecture tonight. Before we talk about the threats, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the Hormuz Strait. It was always a it was always it always raised the appetite for occupants to come, and the first occupation in the region started in the Hormuz Strait, and I mean by that Portugal, and then the Dutch and the Russians and the Turks and other international entities that wanted to monopolize this international strait. And why this region in specific? Although it's a bit of a hostile area for people. There's no air, there's no wind, there's no fresh water. It's a totally deserted area, arid area. Why people have been fighting over it for hundreds of years before knowing the mineral wealth of the area? Because there is a geniusness to this area. This place has been a melting point for civilizations and a bridge between continents. And then on the the strait or the Gulf area has always been very important for both the Silk Road and the spices seafarer road or path. The Gulf people have been always talented in maritime, and they were pioneers in trading with horses and spices and silks, and these spices, when we say it was sold to Europe, and the Europeans used to think that the spices were so expensive that they used to say, is it as we say here, if something is too expensive, is it made of gold? The Europeans back then, they used to say, is it made of spice? In 1905, Alfonso de Albuquerque, the famous Portuguese commander, occupied Emirates and Oman, and then went to the Hormuz Kingdom, and he was able to destroy and to bring it to rebel, and he controlled that area, which was in the Hormuz Strait, and Portugal established a colony. It didn't last for too long because England was invited by the Safavids from Iran in coalition with the Dutch to bring down the Portuguese. And in 1920, these three international powers, the Persians, the Dutch, and the British people, were able to come and to kick the Portuguese out. However, there was a conflict between the Dutch and the English. At the end of the day, England or Britain was able to kick out the Dutch from the Gulf. And England started to establish its foothold in the Gulf by signing the first protection agreement. And then they fought with the Qawasim tribe, the rulers in the Northern Emirates, which ended with a famous battle in 1819, in which the outcome was the burning of Ras Al Khaimah. The Qawasim were destroyed, and England controlled Ras Al Khaimah, and then they made the entire coast sign a treaty. And then it ended in the 1st of December in 1971, William Loss, the last governor, English governor in the region, ended it with the local UAE rulers. The Ottomans also had their greed in the Hormuz Strait, but Britain signed a treaty called the Blue Line, which put a stop or a halt to the Ottoman desire, in which England came victorious or had monopolized Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Yemen. England signed another agreement, the Petersburg Agreement, which between Russia and England, in which northern Persia became a colony for Russia and the southern part for England. Even the Germans tried to have a coalition with the Ottomans, and they established the Berlin-Baghdad railway, and then they tried to monopolize the red iron excavation, but England was able to stop the Germans and hold them in their place. Even the Belgians, the Belgian put Persian flags on some Arab islands, but England fought all of that and monopolized the Gulf, and they called the Gulf a British lake. And the Hormuz Strait was the main center of attention because so before we talk about, when we're talking about authority, when we're talking about Iran threats in the light of or in balance of international law, how can we know that Iran doesn't have a legitimate claim to the area? First, we have to discuss these claims. There are 5 maritime areas that have been set by the international law. For every country has 5 marine areas, and the authority over those areas depends on how far it is from the coast. So there is something called regional waters. Regional waters, this is the land, and this is the internal waters. To every coastal country has interior water, which is like the khors and the fjords inside the country. And this is the internal waters. And then we start measuring regional seas from 12 marine or sea miles. And so till 12 miles is considered under the authority of the country as if it was part of the dry land. International law gives any country in the world the right to pass through this regional sea or water, which is considered part of the land region of the, which we call innocent passing, because the country owns all the wealth up to 12 marine miles. But we can consider it as a condition or as an exception that any country in the world can pass through these regional waters in an innocent passage, which means in a way that doesn't threaten the motherland. For example, the regional waters of the UAE, any country with its ships can pass through the regional waters of the UAE in an innocent, non-harming way. How can we know that a pass is not an innocent one or a harmful one? For example, if it loads down weapons or pollutes the environment or establishes contact points, communication points or centers, this makes it a non-innocent pass. But an innocent pass is something that should not be halted. If we have a submarine, for example, passing through, the owner country has to, or rather, the owner country should demand that the passing submarine should pass on the surface and not diving in, and lift its flags in a show of peaceful intention. Then we have another 12 sea miles or marine miles that are called the adjacent area. This adjacent area to the regional waters, it is not considered part of the country. The country doesn't have any claim to it. But the country has certain claims that has to do with initiatives, for example, or preemptive actions. If, for example, they knew that there is some kind of harm to the environment, or if there is any harm to its trade, they can do preemptive strikes, let's say, or actions, but they don't have any actual claim to the water. Or, for example, as we said earlier, that a submarine that is passing through should be floating when it's passing through, or on the surface. No, it doesn't have to. The country has the right to monitor these waters in order to safeguard its regional waters. Then we have another area called the pure economic region. It goes for 200 marine miles. What are the rights of the coastal country in this region or this area? The country doesn't have the right to stop any submarine or ship or plane from passing through. The country has rights that has to do with the wealth and to explore. So because we can get that from the terminology of the area, the economical region. There is no governance here. Any country has the right to have communication lines, but it just has the right to control the wealth. After these 200 marine miles of this pure economic region or area, then we measure something called the continental shelf. What do we call that? That the country has authority over only what's on the bottom of the sea, on non-living wealth, or extinct biowealth, not extinct, but rather stuck to the ground wealth, like, for example, certain marine creatures that are stuck to the floor of the sea, like barrier reefs, for example. And my bad for taking too long in explaining this. Now, if we go, and this is the same idea. If, for example, we try to measure the Hormuz Strait. The Hormuz Strait, what do we mean by strait? We have to be exact in our definitions or terminology. What do we mean by strait? Does that mean the strait that goes from the Omani Islands to the highest point on the Iranian coast? Is this the strait, or is this the Hormuz Strait, which is also the Hormuz Strait? This is Iran as well. Is this also the Hormuz Strait? The strait in the legal frame, what is it? When Iran says that it's going to close the strait, does it mean it's going to close these marine areas? These go for 51 or marine miles, and the other one is a bit longer. So a question here: in accordance or in the balance of international law, does this entire area considered as a strait? No, the international law doesn't deal with these straits in this legal definition, as long as it doesn't exceed 24 marine miles. So this is not considered a marine strait or a sea strait according to the international law. And the international law doesn't deal with that. So the international law doesn't deal with that. Because what exceeds 24 marine miles is out of the agreement of the UN for the seas. That, as you can see here, the strait, we said the UN agreement for sea waters, that the strait definition according to the UN for 1982 is the strait that doesn't exceed it in its width 24 marine miles. So if we have two opposing countries, this country has 12 miles and the other country another 12 miles. If it was less than 24, then there is a middle line that separates between the two countries. For example, if we come to the Hormuz Strait, this is the Omani-Iranian borders. Where is this strait? Where is it located? This is the international strait that is dealt through in the balance of international law, which is goes only from the last Omani island to the first Iranian island. This is the Salama islands, and there's Larak, which is the shortest point in the Hormuz Strait. And the Musandam rocks between the Quinn or Salama rocks and Larak rocks is the strait that we call the Hormuz Strait. Its length is 21 marine miles, which is less than 24. So it goes under the UN seas agreement. It's clear that this area is in the regional waters for both countries. So according to the legal definition, it's in the regional waters of both countries. The question here is, we mentioned previously that regional waters are considered part of the regional waters of the country. And there is authority. Submarines should be floating, flags should be held up, and the passing through should be innocent. No harm from it. Do we apply that right over the Hormuz Strait? No, because the UN agreement for the seas has mentioned if the international strait is considered consists of regional waters from two countries, the two countries should not apply innocent passing, but there's a new system called passing through only. This system puts a leash on the authority and the control of the country over those waters, and there's only one exception. If there is in the strait, for example, there are army or hostile ships that started their hostile attack. But if ships are just passing through innocently to pure economic regions, as we mentioned before, then the country should not do any cause any issues unless those ships are a threat to it. But as we know, according to the legal framework, because the basis for a relationship between countries is good intent, no country has the right to do a preemptive strike because it thinks that another country is hostile towards it. You will be surprised with the following. This strait between the regional waters of both Oman and Iran, the surprise here is that the international marine lines that go in and out of the Hormuz Strait are in the Omani side and not the Irani side. These are the regional waters. This is the Hormuz Strait goes from here to there. This is the Larak Island in Iran. 12 miles for Iran and 12, and within the 12 Omani regional waters, the actual canal, the actual entrance to the Gulf lies there. Why it has been set there? Because the waters on the Omani side are deeper than the Iranian side. Imagine that the entire Gulf is deeper on the Persian side or the Iranian side, except on the Omani side, it is deeper in the Hormuz Strait. The entire Gulf on the Iranian side is deeper than the Arabian side, with the exception of the Hormuz Strait, where it's deeper on the Arabian side, the Omani side. So, but all of these canals or passages are within the Omani regional waters. The strait, according to the legal definition of the pathways, are within the Omani side, so that the barrier reefs would not lead to the ships, passing ships, would not collide with the barrier reefs of the region. When Iran says, I'm going to close the Hormuz Strait, what comes here to mind that it's going to attack or to go over the authority of another country, over its own regional waters. The strait, in and out, is on the Omani side, and no country has the right to close this area unless it goes over the Omani authority here. And of course, this is something that is not acceptable. So the Iranian threat comes from this. It's in direct conflict with the UN agreement in 1982 that allows all ships from all countries to pass through a strait, even if it's in the regional waters of the country, innocent or rather, sorry, pass through. Laws are applied, and the regional country doesn't have the right or a claim to close let's say, the strait doors in front of those ships. The international committee, its well-beings and interests are connected to this strait. When another country comes and says that it's going to close a strait, even if it was in its regional waters, it is a threat to the welfare of the international committee, and it's a breach of the UN agreement. And in addition to them being directly attacking the authority and the governance of another country, as we can see here, the actual strait lies on the Omani side. As you can see here, this is a close-up. This is the Omani Islands, and Iran has no claim and no right to close the strait. If it meant the strait that controls the entrance in and out of the Arabian Gulf, maybe someone would come and say, they're threatening in another way. I'm going to close the strait. Hormuz is a massive or is a big strait. Yes, the legal part, these two pathways are the legal definition of the Hormuz Strait. But maybe Iran is threatening that it's going to hinder the passing outside those waters, or in this region, for example, before we enter to the actual strait. Does the international law allow to any country, and of course the entire Arabian Gulf, we don't have anything called high seas, because we have internal waters, regional waters, adjacent areas, and then the free economic region, and then the continental part, and then we have the high seas. No country has any authority over it. The Arabian Gulf doesn't have high seas in it. It's all connected. The last point in it are pure economic zones and continental areas. As you can see, there is a conflict between Iran and Arabian countries over the continental shelf, because the Gulf is pretty narrow. There are no high seas in it. So, if Iran said, I'm going to close not just the pathways that are in the Omani regional waters, if it says, I'm going to go to other pathways that are, for example, between the islands, especially since that these two pathways goes to another passway that lies in the south of the Greater Tomb Island. So Iran controls those areas outside the strait, but it shouldn't, since it is in the pure economic zones of the countries. Does Iran have the right to hinder maritime there? The country has, any country, the regional country or the coastal country has the right to excavate in these areas, but it doesn't have the right to hinder either the flying over those waters or the marine passway. So even if Iran says, I'm going to close these corridors or these pathways, it's an attack over the rights and the well-being of the international community. So this is something that goes against the international law and the UN agreement for the seas in 1982, which has coordinated the pathway, the marine pathway in those corridors, and it stopped any country from threatening the pathway of ships, whether in pure free zones or in regional waters. In Oman, there's something called in the international law, the international responsibility that would force Iran to abide by certain laws and allows the harmed countries to put their case in front of the Security Council. So if Iran does such threats, this might lead to an a rise in oil prices, maybe up to $3. This would lead to harming the international community, and at that point, any country has the right to put its case and claim in front of the International Council or this Security Council. And Article number 4 from the UN agreement, no country has the right to threaten by using arms to attack the interests of the international community. Unfortunately, Iran deals with the world in a pretty bad way. So now we've said the international law says that Iran is doing wrong here with such threats. However, we shouldn't just depend on the international law to be safe from these threats. We have to look at what we can do to overcome these threats and to safeguard and secure our lives and our well-being in this region. The question that we should ask here, before we talk about that, let's say Iran will close the strait, but there's another question that comes into the light. Do you really think that Iran would dare to do such a step? I've spoke from in the balance of the international law. However, practically, can Iran do such a step? Let's discuss certain points to reach this conclusion. First of all, we have to know that all modern active Iranian seaports are within the Arabian Gulf areas. Iran doesn't have any ports in this area, in the Oman Gulf. They have a small port in the Jask area, but all of the others are within the Arabian Gulf basin. More than 60 seaports are there, while they don't have any outside of it. So Iran, in case it closes the Hormuz Strait, as if it puts a poison dagger in its own throat. The other thing, I believe Iran has two speech, internal speech that is pretty arrogant and powerful, to give the impression to the Iranian populace that the Iranian government or system is pretty powerful. But the international or external speech um, is much more peaceful and much more logical. For example, Iran's nuclear program. What Iran said to Trump: if Trump pulls out of the nuclear agreement, we'll give him 1 week and then we will pull out. And this shows that the Iranian regime on the international scene is very smart, very wise, just like a Persian rug is being made. It's very patient, it's very detailish, and it's very artistic in the way and the approach. So the Iranian regime or the Iranian person has a long, is pretty calm and patient when it comes to discussions and agreements. So Iran would not do such a step. If Iran pulled out of the nuclear agreement and then the Iranian representatives went one after the other to beg Europe to keep the nuclear agreement, which shows that Iran would never close the strait. If the Iranian politician said was said on behalf of Mr. Rafsanjani when he was the head of the parliament, he said this was in 1983. We can close the Hormuz Strait with a simple Kalashnikov rifle. Look at this, all of this arrogance, the Iranian arrogance. Then Rahimi, the head of the Marine Forces, Iranian Marine Forces, said closing the Hormuz Strait for us is just like a drink of water. It's pretty easy. Then Rouhani, now the president, said we cannot, no country can, if Iran cannot export its oil, no other country would be allowed to export its oil. Either we all export or we all are deprived of that. And then another ruler came and said yes, we are ready to close. These are all just empty claims and propaganda, international propaganda to show that Iran is a powerful entity and can control the battlefield. Iran is very keen on keeping the strait open. If it's closed, I assure you that the Gulf countries, the GCC countries, would not be harmed. These are the scenarios in case the strait is closed. The barrel or the price of the oil would go up to 200 or 300 US dollars, and this is a scenario in case there is any hindrance to the strait. Any hindrance to that would raise the price between 200 to 350 dollars, which is a catastrophe for Iran, because all of its ports are within the Gulf basin, while GCC countries have external or alternatives. Kingdom of the KSA or Kingdom of Saudi Arabia have the Yom port on the Red Sea, and we have on the Fujairah side also on the Gulf, Omani Gulf, that goes through the Habshan field. Oil. The UAE today exports 2,280,000 barrels through that area. So Iranian politicians said that we say that this is a political suicide and Iran would never do such a step. And this closing might be a reason in Iran destroying itself internally. Today Iran is ridden by a collapse of its currency with extreme poverty, and if they do such a step, then that would be the end or the nail in the coffin of the Iranian regime. So Iran is actually more keen than the others in keeping the strait open because all of its wealth goes through Hormuz. Would any person want to suicide unless they are politically insane rather? Let's say that Iran, as one of the Iranian politicians said, we're not going to close the Hormuz Strait unless we reach with the states and its allies to a point of no return, a 0 point, where Iran would be hit. Iran is deprived from its oil exports, And then Iran would say, you know what, let's burn everything. What are the scenarios of closing the strait, and what are the results once Iran does such a step or such a scenario? How can Iran close the Hormuz Strait? There are different scenarios. Don't expect that Iran would come with its fleets and its submarines and then it would stop at this point here in the marine corridors. Iran would not send its battleships because it would be hit by the American ones. So Iran cannot mobilize or to have a direct confrontation in the Hormuz Strait versus the Americans because they will lose. But there are other scenarios in the strait because it's a small strait. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, such pathways we cannot even have a small marine mine in it because international marine time is very sensitive to security issues. Iran knows that power is not balanced versus the US, so they would do guerrilla warfare against them. Maybe they would fill the strait with sea mines. Iran has they have a lot of marine, their marine fleet is pretty vast, through submarines and ships. As one politician, Iranian politician said, we're going to plant the strait as a farmer plants a seeds into a land. If one, two, or even three marine mines or sea mines explode, if you please, 2 minutes. Yeah, 2 minutes are left. So they might use marine mines or ballistic missiles or anti-ship missiles or suicide boats. These are one of the scenarios. But all of these scenarios, Iran would lose in them because it cannot have a prolonged confrontation versus the US. And they will have all of their seaports destroyed and their marine fleet destroyed. Just 2 more minutes and we'll finish. We'll conclude. So the US efforts, we have here to not depend too much on those efforts, but we have to depend on ourselves. Every American president came with their own faith. Some of those faiths were pretty fast. For example, the Nixon principle. Nixon came with a weird principle in 1969 that the Gulf should be protected from the USSR, Soviet Union at the time, and we should have the two parallel columns policy, the KSA and Iran, and then America foresaw the Arabs and empowered the Shah at the time. So all American principles were unfortunately against the Arabs, whether intentionally or not. Then we have the Carter principle. In 1980, he established the fast intervention or speedy intervention policy. And then in the Iraqi-Iranian war, they were pro-Iraq, and the Gulf spent billions of dollars to Iraq to stop the Iranian attack. And then we had the Reagan principle in 1981. He was saying that he is in coalition with Iraq. The biggest issue was Iran contract. They used to the Contra. They used to the US used to provide the opposition at that time. And then there's the double containment, which was during the Clinton presidency. At the time, they were attacking Iraq on a daily basis, instead of Iran, and only Arabs lost here. And then the axis of evil that has been declared by Bush, North Korea, Iran, Iraq. North Korea is still there. Iran remains. Iraq destroyed. And then this is the last slide. What are the options? What are our options to depend on ourselves? Our options. First, as the UAE has done, this is the Habshan line, Habshan Al Fujairah line, which delivers 1,800,000. One of the solutions for the UAE. And this is the east-west oil field from the east side of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to Yanbu. It delivers 7 million barrels daily, which is around 2/3 of the Saudi production, which lowers the threat of the Iranian threat. Is this enough? Of course, Kuwait is going to be suffocated if this happens. Other people might say, why don't we make our own new marine corridors? Because oil corridors or pathways are important, but you cannot have everything delivered through them, especially since it is under the threat of terrorists. And we in the GCC, we are one of the most importing countries or regions in the world. So these oil pathways are going to only allow the pathways of oil, but we need other pathways. There was one suggestion, the Salman Canal, but it's not practical because it faces mountains, and especially since the geography of the region is dangerous. Panama is 90 kilos. The Suez Canal is 150 kilos. The Kiel Canal in Germany is 100 something. We cannot have a canal for 1,000 kilometers. That would need trillions of dollars. And then we have another canal in the Red Sea. The Hejaz mountains, we have to bring them down 50 kilometers under the ground in order to have a safe pathway here. According to my opinion, the best canal that we can make here and is in the UAE. Why? Because it's logical. Some people said, why wouldn't we have the canal here in the Omani side? If we do the canal here, it will be under the threat of the Iranian threat because it is close to Iran. But if we do a canal that starts from Dubai and ends in Fujairah, Fujairah's port is a ready port to accept and host giant ships right now. And then the Jebel Ali port in Dubai is a ready port as well. And the UAE has an international experience in managing and directing ports. So, Jamal Abdul Nasser, the late Egyptian president, said, our main issue was to have the technical staff in order to direct or manage the Suez Canal away from the Brits or the British. But in today's world, the UAE, the local populace here, the nationals, have the experience. 5% of that, 95% of this canal that we would make goes through easy navigable areas through the desert, and only 5% of it goes in the mountains of the east coast. And thus, the ships would pass through away from the Iranian threat into the Arabian Gulf and the regional waters of the Arabian countries. And this was in short, and thank you very much, and peace be upon you all. I apologize for taking too long. I tried to have a holistic overview of the lecture. Thank you very much for this valuable discussion. And now we were going to open the panel for the discussion. If you have any question, please do stand up. Be clear, identify who you are, and have a very clear question, if you please. Please go ahead. Your Excellency, Dr. Abdul Latif Al-Sayadi, thank you very much for this technical and strategic and deeply informative lecture. My name is Dr. Saleh Al-Maid, and I'm a researcher. What I would like to add, I would like to shed light on that might help others to ask their questions. You've mentioned some critical points. From where does the importance of international marine straits came? It's from before the events of the 11th of September in 2001, and after September 11th, there was a change for the strategy of oil led by the US. The oil was for the US was very important. They were not worried from where the oil comes from. But after the 11th of September in 2001, an added value to the oil was the source. 90 to 95% of oil is being passed through marine straits. And that's why the strategic vision of the UAE, which you have mentioned it, and you mentioned the Habshan-Fujairah line, it's very important to neutralize the importance of the Hormuz Strait. The only country, from my point of view, from the international, that thought about neutralizing the Habshan pass was the UAE. The UAE also welcomes the entire GCC countries to come to bring its own oil to the Fujairah port, since they have the strategic tanks that can hold all of that oil. According to my point of view, we should have an Arab strategy, a unified Arab strategy, to decrease the importance of the Hormuz Strait, in addition to the international dimension that Iran would not be able to close the Hormuz Strait because it deceives the regional vision. Iran would not be able to close the Hormuz Strait due to the reasons that have been mentioned. Thank you very much. You've explained everything. God bless. What I would like to say is that collaboration between the GCC countries in specific to reach a unified definition or a way solution to neutralize Hormuz Strait. We're not saying let's close the Hormuz Strait, but we should have parallel solution that can be used when needed. For example, Gulf countries were always dependent, and this is the catastrophe on depending on a single source. Till 940, they were pearl trade dependent, and they never thought about an alternative. Japan invented artificial pearl. The Gulf countries' economy collapsed, and they lived in extreme poverty. Oil came. Until now, we are dependent on the unilateral income of oil. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, may God bless him, said, we're going to celebrate the export of the last oil barrel in 50 years. No human would celebrate the end of his wealth. They should weep. But he had another intention. What he meant is that after 50 years, we would have established the economy of knowledge that is dependent on innovation and that is dependent on never-ending resources, on the human mind that can run the wheel of innovation and development. And this what was meant by what His Highness has said. And what I say, in order to avoid the catastrophic outcomes of the future, we should find alternatives to the Hormuz Strait, because Iran, unfortunately, whether Iran, the big Iran in our eyes is that has integrated with the Islamic civilization and had enriched the universe with her scientists. And when we say Islamic architecture, or Islamic science, it's actually Persian architecture and Persian scientists. But Iran is going to remain small in our eyes as long as Iran is small in our eyes as long as they consider the Gulf Iranian or Persian only and not Arab. Iran looks at us in a diminutive way.
قال يعني
One person, which I'm very proud to know, said, Iran has this Persian racism goes on that have a bad view of Arabs, where they think Arabs are a lower group of people. The last question, if you please. Sayyid al-Mazru'i, a PhD student in international law. I would like to ask Mr. Al-Sayadi, what has Iran done in a bad way to the 1982 UN agreement, and what are the punishments or the I'm not talking about the solutions, but I'm talking about the penalties and the in case Iran breaches that agreement. Yes, I have your question. Thank you very much. You've talked about what are the punishments that should be forced upon Iran. Are there articles in like Article 89 from the UN resolution in the 7th chapter, Article number 39 rather, said the UN, the International Security Council has the responsibility to keep peace, or security and safety, and it has the right to do all the measures that any country has the right to do, and to preserve peace through two ways. The first way, to work according to the Article number 41, which said the Security Council has the right, when a country does any threat to another country, that it can do an economical and social embargo on a country, as what happened in Iraq. And the 7th chapter said, in case these measures are not working, according to Article 41, the Security Council would apply Article 42, which is using marine, air, and land power or forces against the country that has breached. So, countries can tighten the rope around the Iranian neck and to apply and to present their complaints in front of the Security Council. Any country that is being threatened has the right to present its case in front of the Security Council, and this comes later. So first, economical embargo, especially if they have hindered the marine usage of the strait. And number two, we would have the aerial bombardments, and it happened in many countries, and especially in Iraq. Thank you very much. Okay, I think, did we have enough? The last question, if you... Last question, please, but please in brief. I'm Dr. Abdul Sulaiman, a PhD holder in comparative law. In honesty, after this historical, let's say, tourism tour that you've took us through, you've led us to a suggestion which I consider strategic, that shows the national capabilities and prowess, especially since you showcased the principles of some of the American initiatives or principles in our recent history. I think that this case, it wasn't in Iran's best interest, as you have, as Mr. Abdul Latif had mentioned, to suicide by choosing such a choice. However, what should what we should say in a positive way to establish a canal or a pathway between Dubai and Fujairah's port is a strategic option regardless of the international conflict, because logic doesn't apply the Iranian suicide. However, regardless, we would like to. I just wanted to have this intervention. A small commitment, or rather, talk here. This investment doesn't have to be a purely UAE investment or Emirati investment. Other GCC countries or other Gulf countries can participate, and it would empower the GCC or the Gulf unity and to connect in a single fate and a single strategy, because the canal became a unifying factor for the GCC countries more than any previous time. Thank you very much. We had enough questions. At the end of this lecture, I would like to repeat on behalf of Dr. Al-Sayadi, His Excellency Al-Sayadi, the head of the Emirati Center for Strategic Studies and Research, all our thanks and appreciation for Mr. Abdul Latif Al-Sayadi, and to you, esteemed guests. And we hope to meet you in another scientific lecture. And peace be upon you all.